Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a big event because we have actually finally finished Conversations with Yogananda. I have to say I'm kind of sorry. 132 or 33 classes, and considering how many months I spent either in seclusion writing Light Bearer or traveling. God knows how many years it's been since we started. But it was a great adventure, and I'm very sorry that it's over. But the suggestion was that we now go through the book Divine Friendship, which is a collection of letters by Swami Kriyananda. There are a lot of words in this book, and the print is very small. So I think we're probably not going to do every word that's in this book, but there's a lot of great words in this book and wonderful ideas. So starting tonight, we'll start in on this and see how it goes. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda. Bless our evening together, that we may be guided by your presence, and that we may receive into our hearts and minds your blissful presence. We are your children. Awaken us in thy light. Om. Peace. Amen. So we're going to start with Keshava leading us in a couple of chants, a few minutes of meditation, and we'll begin.
Fill my heart with music, I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrow's gone, in joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music, I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrow's gone, in joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music, I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrow's gone, in joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music, I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrow's gone, in joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music, I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrow's gone, in joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music, I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrow's gone, in joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music, I dance through life with thee. I sing your song and sorrow's gone, in joy I live ever free. I sing your song and sorrow's gone, in joy I live ever free. the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart.
Let's meditate now for a few minutes. Om, peace. Amen. All right, dear friends. This book was collected out of many years of Swami's files. I think actually Swami kept all the letters that he wrote when he was writing them on paper. We had huge paper files of all the correspondence when I was his secretary back in the early 70s, file cabinets full of his letters. Then, when he went to email, it was all stored on his computer, and pretty much everything was kept. And so, let's see, does she say in here where she did it? So a friend of mine, a woman named Nidruva, who, it says from the 1970s to the present, whenever this book was published 2008, so that's really quite a lot, 30, 40 years of letters. And she went through all his files, and she's very thorough. She is a trained attorney, so she was very thorough about being able to look at things, and just went through all the letters and tried to find those that were the most universal in their message, and then organized them into a number of categories ranging from advice and encouragement, talk about writing, yoga and Christianity, and one of my favorite categories is called strong medicine, because there was a whole pile of letters where there was really nothing else to call them except strong medicine. And she edited them not for the concepts, but she edited them to take out identifying personal characteristics so that no one could recognize themselves and no one else could recognize each other in these letters. In fact, there's one or two in here that were directed to me, but I didn't even remember it because she sort of adjusted it so that it became the general advice. There's one I know of that was directed to me, and I didn't remember it until she told me. So this is really a very, very fine collection of spiritual advice. And one of the things that makes it particularly interesting and dynamic is that in every case, he was actually talking to some particular person. It wasn't like the abstract question of renunciation or of loving God or something like that was presented to him as like a sermon topic. Of course, whenever Swamiji would talk, he would always talk extemporaneously, and he would always talk in the moment to what the energy of the moment was, projected to him by people in the room. Or, interestingly, he recorded in 2004, 2005, when he was in India, he recorded a series of television shows that he recorded a whole daily program, 300-something programs, into a TV camera, and they were going to be aired later. And I remember asking him, because I was there briefly in India for a brief time when he was working on it. I said, Swamiji, you always talk to the consciousness of the people, so now you're talking to people who are not even watching yet, who are not going to be watching until the future. And he said, Asha, I feel their consciousness somehow. Isn't that interesting? You sort of don't know how far that projects, because a lot of times people will turn on, even now, one of the multitudes of lectures that Swami has on the internet, and it'll just speak to you in exactly the way that you want it to speak. I had an extremely wonderful experience that way. There's one of my favorite recordings of Swamiji is Ask Me About Truth, and he did 108 programs with Dharmadas and Nirmala, and they're two people who are very close to Swami. They lived with him in India and worked with him for decades. And it was the last, I think, set of recordings that Swami did, and he's just sitting in a chair, they're sitting next to him, they ask him questions, ask me about truth. And they, to a certain extent, play the role that they don't know as much as they do. They're asking questions that others might ask, but the atmosphere of the conversation, there's such a depth of friendship behind it, and and Swamiji is so spontaneous and so natural and so humorous because he's very, very comfortable with them, and the vibration among them is very deep. It's vintage Kriyananda, as I call it. It's just perfect. Well, it's been my habit. It was my habit to turn on one of those talks when I would energize in the morning, and then I could just listen to Swami or watch Swami. And I don't know why I was feeling blue, but I was feeling a little bit blue that day, and I don't even know what the specifics of it were, but I think it was nobody loves me and I've never done anything right, kind of one of those moods which comes on all of us. I have to say, every so often, Swami himself would say, nobody loves me, and I've never done anything right. He would never say nobody loves me, because that wouldn't be how he would think. But he too, at times, you just wonder if you've pleased God. Ram Gopal Muzumdar described an autobiography of a yogi. He meditated 20 hours a day. And then he said, I wonder if my small efforts are pleasing in the eyes of God. So there's always that realization, the difference between who we think we could be and who we are. Swamiji at one point said something about how he wished, of course, that he could go back to Master as a mature disciple, because he was such a young disciple when he was with him. If I could be with Master now, knowing what I know now. I said, sir, it's probably true that if the spiritual path is working, one is always going to say that. And, he smiled sweetly. Of course, that's true. Because if one is always progressing, one looks back. And so in that sense, Swami would say sometimes, I would have liked to have done more and better if I had understood more clearly. It wasn't a crisis of faith, but it was just part of what happens to us as human beings. So I was in one of those moods, and I was just feeling a little insecure about something. And Swami's just talking along, and he's talking with Dharmadas and Nirmala. And as far as I can tell, apropos of nothing, over the speaker, Swami says, "That's why I like to work with Asha, because she always had such a good sense of humor." And then he just goes on to whatever else he was doing. And it was like, what? I'm in the middle of the double breath, and all of a sudden, he's just telling me, "It's all right, honey, don't worry. You're my girl, it's okay." And he was just like, Swami would sometimes pat me on the head like a child. He would always do it like that, like it was, "I know you need reassurance." Slightly exaggerated, but very sweet. But wow, it's just, the way the divine works together and the extreme specificity of it sometimes. I don't know what incident that was, and I never made a point of trying to write it down. I thought, that's a once in a lifetime. I don't want to keep spinning it back and hearing him say it again. Just because I'm chatting about this. In the Material Success course, Swami talks about, as in leadership, that you need to motivate people according to what will motivate them, and you have to get to know people and know what's important to them. And then, without telling all the specifics, or maybe he told some of them, he talked about 1976, when he created something that he called, it was the fall of 75 into 76. He created something called the Bicentennial Liberty Committee, which was in Nevada County, California, where Ananda Village was located. And it was this political activism group that we started to protect American rights. And Swami wrote this petition. This is all written up in Lightbearer, I believe. It might also be in Swami Kriyananda as we've known him, but it's in Lightbearer. He wrote this petition about American freedoms being eroded by too much big government, and how we in Nevada County stand for the freedom of the individual, and on like this. And we stood on street corners and gathered thousands of signatures, and then went and presented it to I say we, when I say we, I mean I, presented it to the County Board of Supervisors. I was the one who presented it. I wasn't the only one who gathered signatures. And we did it because the local planning director in Nevada County was completely untrained in her position. And when Ananda community outgrew its original designation of church camp, and the county planning department wanted to get into our life and start telling us what we needed to do, she was simply unqualified to deal with a problem as complicated as we were. It was a planned unit development, which is a basic planning element, but they'd never seen one in Nevada County, and she'd risen to her position of director from being a secretary. She knew nothing really about city planning, but Nevada County at that time was just a little backwater, and that sort of thing could happen. Swami immediately perceived that she was, one, unqualified. He also knew there'd been many complaints against her, including a grand jury investigation of her incompetence, that the whole department was whimsical in its application of the rules. So he realized that the only way we were ever going to get our plan through was we had to get her removed from office. And there was all this stuff about her that the County Board of Supervisors had never dealt with. And no one else at Ananda understood how serious the threat was. Swami just had this far-sighted vision. We thought we had to placate her, and if we kept placating her, but Swami knew human nature. He knew the bureaucratic mindset, and she would just keep putting obstacles in our way until we went away, so she had to be eliminated. And the way to do that was to create this political movement, which we did, which was so out of character for Ananda that no one in the community would touch it. Swami was virtually alone in this. All of this is to say, he writes in the Material Success course, without mentioning my name, there was one person who was very enthusiastic by nature, he said, and I got her to cooperate with me by characterizing the whole thing as a madcap adventure. That's how he put it. Even though my intention was very serious, I made it seem to her like a madcap adventure. And she was a very enthusiastic person. When I got her on board, she got other people on board, which is exactly what happened. And that's exactly how he got me to do it. I just thought, this is the craziest thing. I mean, even to call it the Bicentennial Liberty Committee, because it was the 200th anniversary of America. And my attitude was, if he wants to do it, why not? What do I care? I'm just here to facilitate what Swami wants, and he thinks we need to do it, so we did it. And the truth is, we got her fired. And as soon as she was removed from office, a qualified planning person came in, and immediately Ananda's plan started going forward. It was absolutely true. All I'm saying about that is, it's amazing sort of how clearly, how specifically, and how continually Swamiji was attuned to every individual. He needed that job done. He knew that I could rally others to do it, but he knew if he presented it to me seriously, I wouldn't have known what to think about it. I would have had to think about it. So he didn't think about it. He didn't present it that way. He understood my temperament. So what I'm saying about these letters, that was a long digression, is that these letters have somebody on the other side. So I can't say that I've read every word and can say this, but the tone of each thing will be different. When I worked for Swami as his secretary, which I did, I don't know, 1973, 4, 5, 6, something around in there, about 4 years, not that long. Maybe a little later I started. And he trained me to answer letters. And in Swami Kriyananda, as we have known him, I articulate what the guidelines were that he gave me, because they're very important to read. He said, whenever you're answering a letter, try to tune into, the kind of person who's writing to you. What is their vibration? What will they respond to? And, if they're more intellectual, then you respond to them that way. If they're more devotional, you respond to them that way. If they're lighthearted, if they're serious, so that your answer is not just you open the standard book of answers to these questions and copy out these paragraphs. You feel who it is that you're responding to, and then the letter comes out to that person. And one of the things that makes this book really absolutely marvelous is that there was always another consciousness on the other side of his words. So there's this very sort of direct kind of communication in it. I was thinking, I wrote this book, which is, of course, doesn't compare at all, but I'm going to pull it out because it's a little known but very good book, and it's mine. And it's Ask Asha. And I wrote this, the reason I'm saying it is, I wrote it by asking people on the website to just send me in questions, and I thought that would be an easy way to make a book, which it turned out to be. But it was amazingly interesting to me that when somebody actually asks you a question, what you say is very different than if someone presents the subject in the abstract. And the same thing happened, I think, which is one of the things that makes this book good, is that it's extremely real. It's exactly to someone. There's nothing abstract about it. So, here we are. The first section of this book, of which there looks like there's 10 or 12 sections, is love. What could be nicer? So, I'm not sure that I'm going to really read every word, as I said, because these letters are long, and I just encourage you to get your copy of it. So, I'm pulling out of different letters paragraphs that seem really of great interest to us. So, this one was written on April 5th, 1995. And it says, I'm just going to read the third paragraph here. It is easy to feel love for those who are kind and good, and easier still if they love us. But the test of godly love is to be able to feel it also for those who hate us, and especially for those who are determined to destroy us. God says to us, they're all my children. In other words, if you love me, God speaking, if you love me, you must love them also, for they too are mine. We must love not only them, but all the tests that God sends us as well. Ultimately, the only important thing you can do in life is love God. The only fact that truly matters in life is that God loves you. It is a simple fact that the more we try to do good, the more enemies we will have, along with those who sincerely love, appreciate, and support us. But even were everyone to turn against us, the supremely important fact of God's love will never change. The tests we face, therefore, are always blessings. If nothing else, they inspire us to keep that one divine priority fixed ever before our gaze. Everything else passes. Our relationship with God is eternal. He is our own, as no one else ever will be or ever can be. The solution to our worries is love, and more love. Divine love, not egoic love. The ego's love is rooted in likes and dislikes. As the Bible says, perfect love casts out all fear. Well, that's an ambitious beginning, isn't it? For what's probably going to take us months and months to go through. I'm sure when Nidruva put this book together, she thought we might as well start with a bang. Excuse me. There's this simple statement, and it's in the Bible too. You must not just love those who love you, but you have to love those who hate you. This is 1995. So the context of this letter, in 1994, in November of 1994, let's get all this straight, because this, even though there's no reference here, there's a very important context here. In 1990, Ananda was sued by Yogananda's other organization in an attempt for them to maintain their religious monopoly using copyright, trademark, intellectual property rights. It was a theological dispute, but they made an attempt to bring it into a secular court by talking about who owns the Guru's name, who owns the Guru's writing. We've trademarked these certain things, which included the words Paramahansa Yogananda and the word self-realization. So it was filed in 1990. In the United States, religious freedom is a very valued principle, and it's not possible for one church to own a religious teaching. So by 1993 or 94, almost all the major decisions had been made in that case, and they all went in favor of freedom, not in favor of sectarianism. So in 1994, a different tact was taken, and that tact was a woman who had been in love with a married man and had lured him into an affair, and then he repudiated her and stayed with his wife. This happened in the context of Ananda. She left in disillusionment, and hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned. So she filed a lawsuit accusing Ananda of being an immoral cult, and saying Swami Kriyananda was responsible for the widespread immorality of this cult. We made a very serious mistake in that lawsuit because it was so preposterous we didn't really think it could get any traction. It seemed like it would take about 5 minutes to disprove it, but it didn't turn out that way. It turned into a 4-year ordeal. And so by April 1995, this thing had launched, and it was a big thing. Plus, there had been 5 years of litigation by the other religious organization with tremendous negativity against Swamini, and those were his gurubhais. So when Swami's talking about you have to love not only those who love you, but you have to love those who hate you, the more good you try to do, the more enemies you will make. This was not for him a theoretical question, and whoever wrote this letter to him was not writing to him about what do you think about this idea. It was either, who knows, I don't know what the original letter looked like, but when he answers like that, this is an answer that has come from decades of determined effort on Swamiji's part, to hold his heart open in circumstances where it would be so easy to close it. And then just also warning us, this is what happens on the spiritual path. If we think that the spiritual path for us is that we're going to be surrounded by angelic people, and that we're going to get to think ourselves to be so open and hearted and loving because everybody around us is nice, then he wants us to understand that's not what's going to happen. Because, and this is, it's these are lessons that I've had to learn too, much later in my spiritual life. But it's just, even the people who are the very best people, Swami's relationship to his Guru Bhais, they were the most important people in the world to him, the people he felt the closest to. And they just repudiated him completely. And he remained bewildered for a really long time. He could not really believe it was happening. But then he had to just accept this is happening. So when he says, even were everyone to turn against us, the supremely important fact of God's love will never change. The tests we face, therefore, are always blessings, because if nothing else, they inspire us to keep that one divine priority fixed ever before our gaze. Everything else passes. It's just, and in everybody's life virtually that I know, well, let me be fair about that. In many people's lives that I know, there's always some betrayal. There's always some disappointment, even for devotees, maybe even especially for devotees. And I don't think it has to happen. It has to happen if we're afraid of it. It has to happen if our love for God is conditional. It has to happen if our renunciation is semi. Just like, of course I love you, God. Of course I'll give you everything. And isn't it nice that my life is so comfortable and everybody loves me? And so, what then God just says to you, what will happen if? When Ananda was being very seriously tested especially through this lawsuit, when we were being tested by the first lawsuit, which was just our right to be disciples, it was still extremely controversial within Ananda because Swami drew their fire. That was the way I would put it. And he drew their fire because, I'll just put it simply, what happened with that. Prior to the filing of that lawsuit, everyone assumed that Yogananda was completely owned by that organization. And anytime anybody anywhere used his picture, used his name, you get a letter from their lawyers. And everybody just assumed that that was the way it was. So there was just nobody could use Yogananda. We did, because we were defying it. But when you got a letter from a lawyer, and you're just a little yoga center somewhere, you don't know what you can do to fight this big organization. But Yogananda was very little seen. 12 years of litigation later, there's Yogananda organizations all over the place. You see his picture everywhere. His words can be quoted, Autobiography of a Yogi is in the public domain. Ironically, no one questioned their monopoly until they took another step with it. And the result of taking another step with it is that their monopoly was wiped out. And Yogananda's teachings, our theme for that was Yogananda for the world. And so it became Yogananda for the world. But in the middle, while we were going through it, and when the legal option of trying to win intellectual property through copyright and trademark was dissolved. It was 12 years of litigation, but it was lost in the first 3 years. But it was just maintained with appeals and this other lawsuit, which was an attempt, if you can ruin a spiritual teacher's reputation, you don't have to take him down for any other reason. So there was a very serious character assassination attempt and a character assassination on the whole community. So there was a point it was very interesting, where someone felt we should have a day of reflection because they were thinking this wouldn't be coming to us unless we had done something bad. So we should try to think about what bad thing we have done. Swami's response, and I'll quote it, absolutely not. That was his response to that. He said, this is a beautiful community of angelic people devoted to God. And he said, it is only natural that God would want to test our mettle to find out how much we really love him. And so it's one thing, you see, to be loyal to something when everybody tells you what a fine group you're part of, and you're the darling of the spiritual community movement, and you're the heirs to this great spiritual tradition. It's quite another when everyone is telling you that you're scum, and that your leader is a fraud, and that you're being brainwashed. I had the pleasure of living in Palo Alto, where I've lived for 30 plus years, and that whole lawsuit took place about 3 miles away from here. in the courthouse, the local courthouse. The first one was in Sacramento. This one was local, a little farther than that, maybe 6 miles. And there was a local rag, a local newspaper that was just starting, a daily, a free daily that was just starting. And this was such a big story that this local organization is being sued for every transgression that a cult could be sued for. We made a very unfortunate choice of attorney for that case. We had an excellent attorney for the other one. And he refused to allow us to talk to the press. But the other side was extremely happy to try the case in the press. So every day, there would be nothing from us, and there would be something new. The search for the Swami's treasure, stalking the Swami's harem. I'm not kidding. I mean, these are really the headlines. And so every morning, we'd kind of creep out, and get the local paper and see if we were on the front page of it again. Or, if we'd made it to the second or third page, we were really pleased with ourselves. And still we got members during that period of time. This one woman was telling us, she took her elderly father to the doctor. In the doctor's office is this rag. He looks at it, he starts commenting about this crazy cult. And she says, "Oh, Daddy, I just joined that church yesterday." I mean, I really admired people who came in during that period of time, because their experience just made all these charges preposterous. It was just preposterous. That's what I was saying earlier. But it was really interesting for us, because here we were, and at that time I was part of the Palo Alto Ministers Association. And we go to these meetings every month or so. And I didn't quite have the courage to stand up as strongly as I should have. I regret that. But there was a kind of, like elephant under the rug that no one would really talk about when we were in there. And it was quite, and I was a little cowardly, I have to admit it. I didn't strike out with as much force as I should have. But it was fascinating. Like, why am I on this path? What do I really believe? And when people would come to me, which they often did, to talk to me about it, I never tried to persuade anybody. I felt, if I have to persuade you that this organization has integrity, that I have integrity, that Swami Kriyananda has integrity, if my words will persuade you, then whoever comes and tells you that we don't will also persuade you. And what's the point of that? What is your experience? What do you think? You've been here, you know everybody, you know me. What do you think? Okay, you make up your own mind. I gave people information. We passed out all the legal papers. We hid nothing from anyone. But I never tried to persuade them, because what would be the point? Because this is what happens. I mean, much karma comes to us because there's an aberration. We ourselves have done something improper at a certain point. We have a debt to pay. But there's another kind of karma, which is called persecution. And persecution is a great blessing, really. I remember when Peter Caddy, who was the founder of Findhorn, and at that time was the leader of Findhorn, at the end of Peter's life, he separated from that community for a time, and not long after he died. But at that time, he was the leader of the community and the head of the community. He came to visit Ananda, to visit Swami Kriyananda, because they knew each other and they were peers in a very, very small population of community founders. They were comrades. And just a few months before Peter came to visit us at Ananda Village, his community's in Scotland, they had built a beautiful temple, and it had been burned down deliberately, arson. Somebody had lit it on fire and destroyed it. And it was, we know it takes a huge effort in a fledgling community to build a notable structure. So it was a big loss and a big challenge for the community. But when Peter and Swami were talking about it, Swami was commiserating with him, and Peter said quite simply, "Oh, if they're not persecuting you, you're not trying hard to do good." Just like that. And that was the truth. If you're not putting out enough light for the shadow to try to stop you, you should be putting out more light. That's a very grim sort of statement, and I'm not really saying that we should be seeking martyrdom. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't, as Jesus says in the Bible, if you just love the people who love you, he says, even the tax collectors do this, or even the Pharisees do this, which is to say, it doesn't mean anything. The real proof of who we are is when everything goes against us and we remain the same. And the further proof of it, he says there, is even if everyone turns against us, that we still are confident that God loves us, that our belief in God's love is not based on the fact that other people love us. It's very subtle. It's very subtle. It's very easy to speak it. It's quite different when it actually really happens to you. It's just quite different. And I'm not going to be glib about it, because it's not glib. It's it's been the most serious test practically I've faced in my life, when people that I thought I could rely on turned out not to be reliable. But what comes after a time, and I was talking to a friend about this, and my friend was speaking to me about having felt betrayed by someone. And it wasn't a personal relationship. It wasn't an obvious, romantic betrayal. So I said, well, tell me, what happened? And he described to me things that were not laudable, that, promises made that weren't kept, expectations raised that were not fulfilled. But when I listened to it, I realized that all he was really saying is the other person had high aspirations, had affirmed those aspirations, and then in themselves were not able to live up to it. So the betrayal was not of this person, the betrayal was of their own ideals. So why should we be angry with someone who is imperfect? Where are we going to go with that? As Swamiji said once, if I expected perfection of my friends, I would be a very lonely man. But that's really how we behave. We think we've been betrayed because someone proves to be less than perfect. So we dislike them for it. We're angry for them. It's like, you promised me you would be perfect. Well, how could anybody make such a promise? Even if someone said such a thing, they have no capacity to make that promise. I remember at a certain point in my life when I had to make decisions about really about trusting, committing myself and trusting. And, other people were involved. I had to really put my life into the hands of others. And I was trying to persuade myself that I would be safe because they were trustworthy people. But then I thought, who can predict karma? No one knows what karma is. We might really feel ourselves to be very deeply committed, but it was very early in my life, even in my own young life at that point, I could look back and see a number of times when I went forward in a certain direction, but then something happened. And it wasn't necessarily a fault on my part, it's just karma changes. Karma runs out. What you think is going to go on for a long time, the energy for it just goes away. Because Swami said once, not everybody has lifelong spiritual karma. You'll make a commitment, but the karma runs out. It's just all you have for that life, and you're just incapable of going on with it. So these things happen. But I remember when I was confronted with that decision, and I was frightened, because I knew that something could happen. I was opening my heart, and therefore I was going to be vulnerable. And so what I finally had to say to myself, and this is exactly what Swami says here, was I could trust the people that I was involved with to be as good as they were capable of being. And I had both experience of them and discernment to realize that these were good people. I also had enough discernment to know that they weren't avatars, and therefore they had their own karma. And that karma could arise at any point, as could mine. It was just going to happen. So I couldn't really make myself safe by assuring myself that these people would never hurt me. That was just a lie. There was just nothing I could do about that. That was just wishful thinking of the deepest sort. But what was true was that if in my courageous willingness to trust and to love, that was not fulfilled in the way I expected, that I could trust that God would only bring me that experience if it was going to help me grow. So my trust went right through the people that I was looking at and went to trust God, that whatever karma you bring me is the karma that I need. And believe me, I do not always just say, oh, thank you, God, for just, throwing me onto the ground and running over me with an 18-wheeler truck back and forth, and just leaving me like roadkill. It's not like I rejoice in that. I've lain on that ground and wept and protested and said everything I could until I got up and went on. So I'm not saying you even have to be that good at it. But in the end, that's what you have to feel, because everything else passes. Our relationship with God is eternal. He is our own, as no one else ever will or ever can be. So that's what Swami says about love. Not a small assignment, is it? But what happens to us at a certain point on the spiritual path is you realize you have no choice. And that's an extremely deep and powerful place to come to. I have no choice. That's when, I'm roadkill on the highway and I'm spending a lot of time thinking what my options are, and my options are zero. That's all. It takes time for the mind to really accept that. There must be another option. You have a temper tantrum, you yell, you cry, you write letters to the editor, you do everything you want. But after a while, you realize my relationship with God is eternal. He loves me as no one else can, will, or can, because until we're God realized, we just can't give that kind of love. We do our best. And there's a lot to love in people because they're trying. But until we ourselves are perfect, there's going to be some dangling karmic edges which have to be snipped off. And that's what life is about. I used to think it would be easier. I used to think that it just would be easier. That's the only word I can use. But gradually I realized that there's no escaping perfection, and there's no reason why we want to. This is, Swamiji at the end of his life, he had he had some kind of an operation. I believe actually he had cancer. He had cancer, and he had to have it was in his intestines or in his colon. They had to take out his gallbladder, and then we're going to take out his gallbladder, and in the process discovered that he had a malignant tumor. And so he had to go to the hospital. This was when he was in Delhi. He had to go to the hospital, and they, had to do an operation here, which is an awful place to have an operation. I think, well, I've never had one anywhere, so I don't know, but, it's kind of, and it kind of disrupts the whole system when you cut into this part. And, if it's on your foot or something, it's not quite in the center of your being like this. And Swami was just talking about how, and this was like 2006 or 7, really close to the end of his life. And he was just talking about what a blissful experience it was. He was writing thanking us because the whole world was praying for him. We had, prayer vigils going around the globe, so somebody was always praying for him on a 24-hour cycle there. And he wrote to us about how blissful he felt in the hospital, just receiving all our prayers and everything. And then he quoted to us from the Bhagavad Gita, and he talked about it, and it was a verse about how to the man of wisdom, a clod of clay, a lump of gold, it's just a banquet or dirt, it's all exactly the same. So Swami wrote, he said, so it's really true. He said that I felt just as happy to have been going out to a fine restaurant as to be taken to the hospital, and this is a phrase I never heard Swami use a phrase like this, to have my guts ripped out, is what he said. Swami never spoke in language like that. There's nothing obscene about having my guts ripped out, but it's very vivid and not very poetic. But that's what he said. And he said, I know it seems almost unfathomable, but he said, but that's how I feel. Because everything passes, and the only thing that's eternal is my love for God. And whatever he sends me has to be a manifestation of that love. So why would I not accept it? Perfect love casts out all fear. It's a very high ideal. We think we're into this for God realization, but when we really are, God takes us seriously and we should be glad of it. We should be very glad of it. Oh, look, something new is happening. Let's see what happens next. Swamiji spoke about one woman at Ananda, and it was very, very high praise. He said, she loves to be corrected. And I always thought, because I didn't love to be corrected, I was glad to learn, but I never loved being corrected. I always flinched a little when I was corrected. Not always, but often. But I've thought to myself, I would love to be someone who loves to be corrected. I would love to be someone who loves to confront their limitations and then just rises to the challenge. That's what Swami's asking of us. Okay. So, now this is a letter actually written in the same month of the same year. This is April 4th, 1995. Subject is completely different. Well, no, because it's still about love, but the text is completely different. Retreats, I believe it was a woman, but I don't know. Retreats generally are supposed to be times of self-examination. The important points to remember on retreat are these. There is only one true goal in life: to please God, to come closer to Him, to love Him, to unite our souls to Him. The way to know God is by inner stillness of the heart. This stillness is attained by loving more fully, more calmly, more wholeheartedly, never by deadening the emotions or hardening our hearts against those who would harm us. Nothing and no one truly belongs to us. We are His alone. Joy is ours when we accept fully that we are God's, that God's nature is joy, and that His nature is our nature in our souls. I've always loved a statement of Saint Jean Vianney. If you knew how much God loves you, you would die for joy. You know, there's in this first paragraph, he says, second paragraph, that stillness is obtained by loving fully, more calmly, wholeheartedly, never by deadening our emotions or hardening our hearts against those who would harm us. I misunderstood Swami for quite a few years that I knew him. And it was just what I was saying at the beginning. When we're new on the spiritual path, it's very hard even to imagine what we're dealing with. You know, it's just like you can only see what you can see. I was absolutely, totally dedicated, captivated in every way by Swamiji. I had just complete faith in him, and he never disappointed that faith. His reality always turned out to be bigger than I thought it was. So there was never any point where any of that was a question. But I didn't know what I had in certain ways, and especially what I had to work with all the time, and still do actually, is a soul of enormously expanded consciousness who is able to live in a world much bigger than this one, also completely inhabits this one. And that was a reality that it took me many, many years to understand, because my self-interest and my karmic habit caused me to look at it very differently. Let me think about just how I was going to say this for a moment. There was a thought there. Swamiji was very calm in the face of difficulties. You know, he was always calm. I never saw him rattled. He said, I mean, it's the only word I can think of. I never saw him rattled. Let's see, what was I? Just a second, the words keep going out of my head. Even I know what it was going to say. He said himself that he never allowed anything, he said, to disturb his inner peace. And it was true. It wasn't that he was never intense or engaged or forceful or emphatic or creative or jubilant. You know, he was by no means monotonic in the way he related, but he was just never rattled. Whatever had to be dealt with, he would just deal with it. You know, and like Master said at one point when Master was late for an appointment and was running, someone said to him, "Don't be nervous." He said, "You can run nervously or you can run calmly, but not to run when you're late is to be lazy." That was his answer. So Swami was like that. If it was necessary to run, he ran. I remember one night he had this small meditation room. At the time, what is now Crystal Hermitage, where there's a big dome that is the living room, and until the early 80s, for the first 10 or more years, his entire house was that dome. And then in 1977, they built a bedroom as a basement. But in the time I'm talking about, that dome was his entire house. There was a sleeping loft. There was a partition for the study, but it was just one room. But he had a meditation room that was walled off. Now it's a closet in the upstairs, and he has a whole downstairs apartment. But he wanted to make that room quieter, and and money was always an issue. There was never very much money of any kind. And somebody suggested that he could make it quieter with using cardboard egg cartons, because I guess that egg carton shape traps the sound. Maybe even we were given this huge pile of egg cartons. So he covered all the walls with these egg cartons. But Swami, after I don't know whether it was a matter of weeks or months, but he found all those points very disturbing to his peace. And he really just didn't like it. So he resolved to rip them all out, and we were going to replace it with sheets of styrofoam that were just smooth, and I don't know what else we did. But we started on that. It was Swami and I and Seva. It's possible that Kalyani was there, but I think it was just the three of us. And we ripped all the cardboard out, and we put all the styrofoam in. And it took us till like 3 a.m. We started after dinner, and we just worked on it for hours and hours. And I remember so vividly, Swami never stopped. He just never stopped. He'd set his mind that we were going to do it, and we just did it. We would have been at it for 24 hours if that's what it was taken. And I was newer with him, but I was really impressed. And I've emulated him in that. You set your mind to a project, you just stick with it till it's finished, and you finish it completely. And we did. We finished it completely that night. And I remember the whole feeling of it. So it wasn't that he didn't commit himself. But I myself had developed a way of coping with life, which was to be withdrawn from life, to just be a little bit protected or a lot protected. I used my mental force to protect myself. It's like I didn't quite have the posture, but I have had it, and I do have it a little. A lot of people who are very intellectually inclined try to push against the world with the frontal lobe. I even find when I'm talking here, I lean forward so that you'll hear me better. But sometimes you'll look at people from the side like this, and you'll see that their head pushes forward. And I've had a habit of pushing forward with my head, and it's very illustrative, because what you're doing, and also you see simultaneously, you pull the heart in. So you pull the heart in, you lean forward with your mental powers. You're a little more protected here. In fact, it's very interesting when we're trying to have the right posture to meditate and so on. You sort of try to straighten your spine. You don't exactly know how to straighten it, but if you straighten it by pulling toward the spiritual eye from your heart, then your posture goes exactly as it's supposed to go. If the heart is being drawn up to where the spiritual eye is here when you meditate, then your posture goes exactly as it's supposed to. And Swami Kriyananda's posture, when you saw him from the side, which was that he broke the plane with his heart, not with his mind. And it was really very notable. He had a very specific posture like this, which was shoulders back and chest forward. And he wasn't heavy. It wasn't like it was a belly or anything like that. It was just literally, his spine was straight, his mind was in balance, but his heart was open. And it was too scary for me. It was too scary. So I'm trying to emulate Swamiji. So I created him after my own image. because that was a lot easier. If I made him like me, then I didn't have to be like him. And part of it was just a misunderstanding about how a very spiritually advanced person is totally human. It's even still, I can just say the words, but it's a very big concept. And it's what, let's see, did he quote that there? Let's see. Oh, yes. I didn't really emphasize this in the first letter. He says, but the test of godly love is to be able to feel it also for those who hate us, and especially for those who are determined to destroy us. God says to us, they are my children too. In other words, if you love me, you must love them also, for they too are mine. So this is like Swami's way. When a person is spiritually advanced, nothing in this world frightens them. Nothing in this world repels them. Now, that doesn't mean that they're immune to evil or can't perceive it. Someone said to Yogananda once, just one of these sort of unthought through philosophical principles, God does not know evil, whatever that means. And Yogananda said, well, if that's true, God must be exceedingly stupid. I mean, he was so practical. It's like, of course God knows evil. There's evil all over the place. You know, there's the shadow, the darkness, the more good you try to do, the more the darkness tries to stop you. There's this, depending on the yuga, there's just like this cosmic balance between light and darkness that has to be maintained. Where the light shines, the darkness has to bring it back into balance. This world is never going to be all light. So very good people are often persecuted. Very beautiful things are often destroyed. You know, there's just no reason why God is going to make it all happen the way you want it to happen. He has his own plans. But many wonderful things are for the benefit of the effort that we make and are not necessarily intended to last or to last forever. I mean, many strange things happen, very strange things happen. But my way of dealing with all of that, and I was talking to you just a few minutes ago about, you know, having to commit myself, which came later in my own personal saga of these different points of view, and realizing that I couldn't count on people. I had to just count on God, because karmic experiences, not in this lifetime. In this lifetime, I've been very, very fortunate. But karmic experiences of past disappointments, of which who doesn't have them? You know, you get caught in a plague, your husband dies in a war, your young life is snuffed out before you even get to start. When I was in the late 60s and the 70s, when there was so much intense campaigning against the Vietnam War, and I began to learn about reincarnation, I looked at many of those young men who were absolutely refusing to go in the army and burning their draft cards and, you know, going to Canada rather than allowing themselves to be drafted. I thought, my God, these are the young men who died in World War II. And they're just not going to let it happen to them again. I mean, they might not have been able to remember it, but they had their young lives snuffed out by war. And by golly, they were going to stand against it this time. When I said to Swamiji at one point, sir, I've always had this burning desire to find the power of happiness, to find out what the secrets of happiness are, and to be happy in myself. I said, the irony is I've never been unhappy. And he said to me, past lives. It's so obvious, isn't it? Past lives. When you look around and see the difficulties that happen to people, you think that we're immune to those. Just because they're not happening now doesn't mean they never happened. So I developed over many lifetimes, and I've had to work hard in this lifetime to dismantle it, a lot of self-protective habits. Everybody does. I remembered when I was in seclusion, this particular letter is written about being in retreat. I remember sitting in seclusion, and I was, you get wonderfully quiet and just marvelously removed from the world. I remembered I was following a common spiritual practice and offering myself to God. And I had this thought, remembering that God loves me. I think I'll let God love me. It was very interesting to me that I could literally feel the power of Divine Mother coming, and I could feel the wall that I had set up against her. Now you would say, why would I have set up a wall against God? I didn't have a wall against God. I had just, what does the phrase he use? Let's see. By deadening the emotions or hardening our hearts. Because if you harden your heart against some, you harden your heart against all. Because that's what he says here. If you love me, you must love them also, for they are mine. So you see how difficult it gets? And so what I saw from Swamiji was that he didn't really need anybody's love, and he didn't really trust everybody to love him. He'd had too much betrayal in his life to be naive like that. But he didn't respond by deadening his emotions or hardening his heart because he wasn't afraid. Perfect love casts out all fear. He wasn't looking to have his guts ripped out, but it was all the same to him. Because if it comes to me from Divine Mother, why would I care which way? And that's just to enter completely into this world. What keeps us from entering in this world is fear. Fear of being, spiritually corrupted or spiritually confused, fear of being hurt, fear of failure, fear of ridicule, just make a long list of it. So we deaden our emotions and harden our hearts. But we get trapped on the other side of that, and God gets trapped on the other side of it. So it's not simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. I've always loved a statement of Jean Vianney: if you knew how much God loves you, you would die for joy. Why don't we know how much God loves us? That's a very good question to ask yourself. Why don't I know that? What am I holding at bay? When I had that experience in seclusion, I realized how many hurts and angers I was cultivating, that I was protecting. And I got it to the point once where I realized somebody owes me an apology. When I got it down to that, I began to make progress. It's just I wanted to be the victim. I just wanted to be the victim. I didn't want it to be my fault. And I just wanted somebody to apologize for all the wrong things that had been done to me. I said, who's going to apologize to you? What are you thinking? But this is, we do this over many lifetimes. We can't quite face it. And what I couldn't quite face, because not God realized, is that whatever God sends me is perfectly appropriate and it's for my own good. So why would I cling to this little bit of I've been mistreated and blaming it on you, like my friend saying so-and-so betrayed me, they're not my friend anymore. No, actually, they betrayed themselves. It has nothing to do with your friendship with them. But we hold that because we prefer to harden our hearts. Otherwise, we have to open ourselves to the whole flow of life. And sometimes we get our guts ripped out. And as long as we think that that's not desirable, we're going to have to protect ourselves from it. And so this is why Swami just writes it so big. They're all my children. And you cannot love me unless you love them as I love them. Perfect love casts out all fear. So we're going to stay busy for a long time, aren't we? But we have all the time in the world. And everything in future will improve if we make the right spiritual effort now. That's the important point. As Swami said, it's not like it's nothing but a desert and then all of a sudden we finally get to the oasis. He said, as we walk, the desert begins to bloom all around us. And it's not that it necessarily gets easier, but even the thorn bushes begin to bloom. It just looks different to us. And we're happy when these things happen. Not necessarily emotionally rejoicing, but on a much deeper level, we're happy. Swami talked about when he went through the biggest test of his life, and he literally lay on his bed, he said, and prayed to die. This is when he was kicked out of the monastery after 14 years and was completely cut off from the only life that was valuable to him. And he really did not know what he was going to do. He was 36 years old. It was 1962. And he just lay on his bed and prayed to die. And then, but he said later, Well, then he began to come out and do public work, and he began to speak, and he began to sing and various things. And several people said to him, above all, what they felt from him was joy. And Swami said, joy? He said that was the last thing that he was feeling. But he said when he really looked deeper, he said he realized underneath the surface of suffering, there was a very deep joy. And you see, that's the joy that we know that God loves us, and we know that this trial and trouble is a manifestation of his love. In the last one of the last conversations with Yogananda that I read, it was the story of Saint Teresa of Avila, who had so many tests and trials in her life, and at the end of her life, she undertook this very arduous journey to found a new convent, which was a big thing that they had to do. They had to acquire a building, and then they would move these 12 nuns in, and they would set up this lifestyle and establish this cloister, and she would often go to help start those convents and travel. This was whatever, 1500s or whenever she lived. Travel was, by ox cart and donkey cart and so on. So she's traveling in the middle of winter across a flooded river, and the horse cart is trying to get through the water, but the current is too strong, and she's toppled over, and she's being tossed about in this current. Her sisters think she's about to die, and suddenly she finds herself standing on the other bank of the river, having crossed it miraculously, and she's completely dry, and there's been no intervening. She just appears there, and Jesus is standing in front of her, and he says, "Don't worry, Teresa, this is how I treat all my friends." And she says, "My Lord, that is why you have so few." Perfect. Because he's saying it's not, the fact that I challenge you continuously, this is what Swami said to us. God is very impressed with the quality of our devotion, and it's only natural that he would want to test our mettle. So you're very loving and you're very kind. What if? What if it's not so easy to love me? What if everybody else isn't praising you? What if you're the only one who loves me? Will you still? Or are you just here because it's the easy path and everybody's supporting you? That's a very good question. And we, to a small extent, got to play it out, as I was saying earlier, when we were just being vilified in the local press. Like, do I really? If they're telling me that there's all these dark secrets that have been hidden from all of us, am I going to panic? Or what do I trust? Am I here because other people say it's good, or am I here because in my heart I know? And even if I'm the only one left, I know. There's a marvelous story in the life of Christ. At the end of a master's life, oftentimes they challenge their disciples because they know they're about to leave, and especially in the life of Jesus, where it was going to get really hard for those disciples. I believe all of them but John were martyred in the end. It was very, very difficult what they had to carry on. So Jesus knew that he had to winnow it down to those who really had the power to follow through, because they couldn't have weakness within their own group. It had to be very powerful. So he started literally driving people away by challenging them. Swami said at the end of Yogananda's life, he did the same. He knew that he was leaving, and he knew that some of them just wouldn't be able to hold to it. He'd taken them as far as they could go in that form, in that life. And so he made it challenging for people. They had to rise to it. He started increasing the vibration, and as it begins to increase, you either get drawn in or you get pulled out. Over the course of Ananda, it almost used to be like clockwork. About every 5 years. Got a little faster, but about every 5 years, something would happen that would radically change the vibration of Ananda. And then you would either get pulled farther in or you would get spun out. And we just sort of watched it. And people, even, you lasted 15 years, but then the last one was too much and you went somewhere. The lawsuits that I was talking about were part of that. The Bicentennial Liberty Committee was one of that too. It was just too weird for people. They just couldn't understand what was going on. It seems like a pittance now, but this is in retrospect. Swami never explains it in advance. He just goes forward. But in the life of Jesus, that's when he started saying, eat my body and drink my blood. And now you have the Catholic Church telling you this wafer represents the body of Christ, this wine represents his blood. Master said the esoteric significance of that was that his body was the vibration of Om, because he wasn't his physical body, he was all of creation. And the blood was the life force of Christ consciousness flowing through him. When he said, eat my body and drink my blood, it means you must rise to my level of consciousness. That's what it is to be my disciple. But he didn't explain the esoteric meaning, and there was no Catholic Church yet to give you the symbolic meaning. He just said, eat my body and drink my blood. And you know that it was not easy, because one of the wonderful passages in the Bible, there's so much in the Bible that I love, it said, the disciples said one to another, this is a hard teaching. It's so real. It's just so incredibly real. Because I've lived in community, and I've been there when Swamiji has done things that people didn't understand. And people say to each other, this is a hard teaching. We're supposed to go into town and get these petitions signed, and, the Bicentennial Liberty Committee, what are we talking about? We're being sued. We're being vilified in court. Maybe we've done something wrong. Why are we doing this? Why are we going to court? All of this like this. This is a hard teaching. And it is a hard teaching. And then it says, from that point, many walked with him no more. Because they couldn't understand it intuitively. So then there's a scene between Peter and Jesus. And of course, Peter is so stalwart. And Jesus says to Peter, are you going to leave me too? And if you really make this human and think about how Jesus would have actually asked that question. And I know how Jesus would have asked the question. I believe I know. Because he wouldn't have said, are you going to leave me too? Because that wasn't the lesson. So it would have just been like, what are you going to do? I've seen Swami in situations like that, where he just wants to know what you're going to do. He's not going to push you one way or another. He's not going to have any emotional energy about it. He's just going to say, what are you going to do? Because if you don't come forward, there's nothing he can do for you. So I believe, this is my interpretation, Jesus said it to Peter like that. Peter, lots of people have left. And they don't list in the Bible who left. They don't tell you, how dedicated they were and how many there were and what the expectation was and how many they thought were going to stay who turned out not to have it in them. So, Peter, are you going to leave me too? And then Peter answers. Peter does not say, oh, I understand this esoteric teaching. I'm not confused by it, sir. I know exactly what you mean. He says, where would I go? And what that means is, you're mine. And the implication to me, at least, is he didn't know what Jesus was saying either. But he knew who Jesus was, and he knew that his life belonged to Christ. Period. So where would I go? What else can I do? And so, that's where you have to come to in our lives, It's just like, there's no alternative to this, is what I was talking about, being run over by the 18-wheeler. It's like, you can just lie there and whimper as long as you want. I can just lie there and whimper as long as I want. And God will let me lie there and whimper as long as I want. I can lie there for incarnations. And I'm sure I have. I'm sure there have been many lifetimes where it was just like, enough. I've had it. I'm going to just seek some easier path. But as Master says, once you have, tasted fresh cheese, stale cheese will never satisfy you. Once even a little bit of that longing for God and that experience for God touches you, you'll just never be satisfied with anything else. And then lifetime after lifetime, we keep trying to find out, do I have a choice? Do I have a choice? Do I have a choice? Finally, no, I don't have a choice. And then who cares? I want to be free. If this is how I get free, this is how I get free. If God, and then I know this is true, if there were another way to get there, God would take me that way. Why would he take me through more suffering or misery or disappointment than I need? He's just trying to get me from here to there. That's all he wants, because God loves me. And he really loves me, and he wants me to love him the way I love him. And he knows these are the pieces that have to be filled in. And you have to be fearless about that. And tension is not the same as fearless. And that's the difference between deadening our emotions and hardening our hearts. That's tension between the way I saw Swami. Lots of things happened to him that were just awful. But he never flinched. And he never got rattled. It would be, look at that. And he himself said, because I take things calmly, he said, people think I don't feel them deeply. He said they don't understand. And I realized that's what I didn't understand, you see. Because he took things calmly, I thought he was doing what I was doing. Because I took things calmly by hardening my heart and deadening my emotions. But that wasn't calmness, that was numbness. Swami was calm. It went all the way in. There was no protection. But there it was. He didn't resist. So there's one more. Let's talk here. It is difficult sometimes to understand what is happening when we look at life only from a human perspective. We can only trust that whatever comes is from Divine Mother. The more we love her, the sweeter her ways become, whatever they may be. Well, that's really pretty much everything we've been saying, isn't it? It was difficult to understand from a human perspective, and that's where it's complicated, isn't it? I was thinking, let me just think this through for a minute. I remember Swami scolded me once in a way that didn't seem quite fair. But I understood what he was doing, and somebody, in an attempt to help me, tried to tell me that Swamiji had behaved wrongly toward me. It was one of those very spontaneous moments, and it was really interesting. I turned on the person who was a good friend of mine. I said, "Don't ever say anything like that to me again." Because I knew Swami wasn't wrong. It wasn't even blind belief. It's just I knew what he was saying to me. And it was a very subtle spiritual point, and I knew exactly what it was. But because it was subtle, and I don't love being corrected, but because it was subtle, it wasn't obvious to my friend, but it was very obvious to me. But also it was deep, and therefore I was quite rattled by it, and I was quite upset. But it was like, don't try to comfort me by reducing my faith in God. And of course, Swami is not God, but Swami acted consistently, without exception in my life, as the instrument of God and Guru to me. And in that particular case, again, I knew he was right. I was just upset about it. It was one of those 18-wheelers that had just gone over me, and I had to just deal with the revelation that his comments had given to me. But afterwards, I began to think that almost the whole point of that experience was so that I would spontaneously realize how committed I was. Because we all get insecure about how deeply committed we are to God. And I realized that when somebody tried to comfort me by giving me an out, other than just trying to face it, my first response was, "Don't do that to me, you're no friend of mine." And I thought, wow, that was great. After everything calmed down, I thought that was just absolutely wonderful. And that actually gave me more confidence almost than anything else from that whole experience. Was that, look at that. I really I'm stronger and more sincere than I myself knew. And it was very gratifying to me that such a thing happened. We can't understand these things from a human perspective. We have to always be able to stand back and just see what is God's plan and how are we going to get there. I'll just tell this one last thought. Swamiji was often making suggestions and ideas and plans. He was way out of the box, and not everyone was able to go with everything that he wanted to do. And I myself would sometimes react to some of his suggestions. But I finally figured out the way to work with him was not to ask, what is he suggesting, but what is he trying to accomplish? And then how can I help him accomplish that? Because sometimes his ideas were not the most well-informed ideas, and I might be able to give him information and come up with a better plan. But whenever I ask the question, what is he trying to accomplish? Then everything looked different to me. And that's a question we can always ask ourselves. Not, why did so-and-so betray me? Why did I have to lose this? Why was that taken away from me? The question is, I wonder what God is trying to accomplish. And we could almost always tell by our reactions to it. Why am I upset? What is he trying to teach me? And that has nothing to do, because the circumstances are created to teach us the spiritual lesson. Circumstances are completely irrelevant. It doesn't make any difference what they are. They're just there to teach us the spiritual lesson. So not what happened, but what is God trying to teach me? Because the human perspective makes no difference. And then even if everybody is wrong, it doesn't make any difference, because if it's going to teach you what you need to learn, that's all he's trying to give you. Well, my friends, God bless you. Thank you for spending this time with me. I pray that Swamiji's loving wisdom come into your heart and uplift your life as it has uplifted mine. Bless you all.